September 8, 1941. Leningrad. The woman's hands trembled as she placed the dark brown rectangle on the improvised scale. 125 grams. The bread, if it could be called bread, contained more sawdust and cellulose than actual flour. This small piece represented her entire daily ration, the only food she would receive for the next 24 hours. At 42 years old, a schoolteacher before the war, she weighed 89 pounds. 6 weeks earlier, she had weighed 132 pounds. The mathematics were simple. At this rate of starvation, she had perhaps 30 days remaining before her body consumed itself completely. She was one of 2.5 million people trapped inside Leningrad. The German Wehrmacht had completed its encirclement that morning at 11:35. The city that stretched along the Neva River, founded by Peter the Great in 1703, was now a prison. No roads led out. No railways functioned. The only connection to the outside world was Lake Ladoga to the east, and even that would freeze solid within weeks. Soviet officials had begun calculating survival time using methods normally reserved for besieged fortresses in medieval warfare. The results were catastrophic. At current consumption rates, the city had 35 days of flour, 60 days of cereal grains, 30 days of meat, and 47 days of fats. After that, nothing. The daily ration had already been cut 3 times since August. When the siege began, each person received 500 grams of bread daily. By late August, that dropped to 375 grams. On September 2nd, it fell to 250 grams. Now September 8th, it stood at 125 grams for non-workers and 250 grams for labourers and soldiers. City officials knew these numbers would continue falling. The German artillery had destroyed the Badaev warehouses on September 4th. The warehouses had contained 3,000 tons of flour and 2,500 tons of sugar. The fires burned for 5 hours. Smoke visible for 20 miles. When Soviet engineers surveyed the damage, they found the sugar had melted into the earth. Desperate workers would later excavate this dirt, 4 feet deep, to extract sugar-contaminated soil that could be processed into something edible. The mathematics of starvation operated with precision. The human body requires approximately 2,000 calories daily to maintain basic functions without physical labor. Heavy labor demands 3,000 or more. The 125-gram bread ration provided approximately 300 calories. The 250-gram ration for workers, perhaps 600 calories. Supplemental rations of soup, when available, added another 100 to 200 calories. Maximum daily intake for most citizens, 500 calories. The deficit between requirement and reality created a metabolic equation with only one solution. The body would consume its own fat reserves first, then muscle tissue, then organ tissue. Death would follow, predictable as mathematics. By December 1941, mortality statistics documented the equation's progression. Deaths reached 4,000 daily in the city. Most died at home. Some died in the streets, collapsing from exhaustion and never rising. The NKVD created special brigades to collect bodies each morning before children walked to school. The collection teams used sleds because fuel for trucks had been redirected to military use. Temperature records from December showed sustained periods of -30 degrees Celsius, with some days reaching -40. Bodies froze solid within minutes of death, making collection easier but burial impossible. The ground was frozen too deep to dig graves. Bodies accumulated in warehouses, thousands of them, waiting for spring. The city needed food, not in weeks or months, but immediately. Soviet officials calculated that preventing mass starvation required 2,000 tons of food delivered daily. Flour, meat, fats, sugar, anything with calories. The only possible route was by sea, north through the Arctic Ocean to the port of Murmansk, then south 500 miles by rail to Lake Ladoga, then across the lake by barge, or eventually across the ice by truck. The journey was 2,000 nautical miles from Allied ports in Iceland or Britain, through waters now controlled by German U-boats and covered by Luftwaffe bombers operating from occupied Norway. The Arctic convoys had begun in August 1941. Experimental runs to test the feasibility of the route. 7 small convoys delivered 40,000 tons of supplies between August and December. Valuable, but nowhere near sufficient. Leningrad consumed 2,000 tons daily. The August through December deliveries represented 20 days of food for the city, delivered over 4 months. The rate had to increase by a factor of 10, or everyone trapped in Leningrad would die before spring. The German Kriegsmarine had positioned 30 U-boats in Norwegian waters specifically to intercept these convoys. The Luftwaffe maintained bomber squadrons at airfields in Bardufoss and Banach, within range of the convoy routes. German intelligence knew what the Allies were attempting. The orders to U-boat commanders were explicit. Sink every ship carrying supplies to the Soviets. Starve Leningrad into submission. The Germans calculated that destroying even 30% of each convoy would create an unsustainable loss rate. The Allies would abandon the route. Leningrad would fall. But 2,000 miles away, cargo was being loaded into the holds of merchant ships. Ships with names like SS Christopher Newport and SS Thomas Hartley. Liberty ships, mass-produced American vessels designed to be built faster than U-boats could sink them. Each ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo. One ship represented 5 days of food for Leningrad, if it arrived. The cargo manifest detailed exactly what the dying city needed. Flour, measured in thousands of tons. Canned meat, packed in cases stacked 8 feet high. Condensed milk, sugar, lard. Medical supplies, though food was the primary mission. Every pound of cargo loaded represented a calculation. How many lives would it save? How many days of survival would it purchase? The convoys assembled in Reykjavik, Iceland, or in Loch Ewe, Scotland. Merchant ships from America and Britain, sailing under flags of convenience, manned by civilian crews. Most of the merchant sailors were older men, exempted from military service but volunteering for convoy duty despite knowing the statistics. 30% casualty rate on Arctic runs. 1 in 3 ships never returned. The odds were published openly in maritime journals. The men sailed anyway because someone had to, and because 2.5 million people were starving 2,000 miles away. The cargo that would decide their fate sat in those holds, secured with chains and covered with tarps, waiting for departure orders, waiting for the convoy to form, waiting to run the gauntlet through Arctic waters where German submarines hunted and where the ocean itself could kill faster than torpedoes. The journey would take 12 to 14 days if weather cooperated. Every day of delay was another 4,000 bodies in Leningrad. January 12, 1942. Reykjavik, Iceland. Captain William Carter stood on the deck of the SS Thomas Hartley, watching stevedores load the final pallets into hold number 3. Each wooden crate bore Cyrillic lettering stenciled in red paint. The longshoremen couldn't read Russian, but they understood weight. 3,200 tons of food descended into the holds on cable hoists that groaned under the load. Carter had sailed merchant routes for 22 years, carried everything from cotton to coal, but never cargo where he knew the exact body count of people waiting for delivery. Every day of delay meant 4,000 dead in Leningrad. The mathematics made sleep difficult. The manifest ran to 4 pages of itemized inventory. 1,800 tons of wheat flour in 100-pound sacks, stacked on wooden pallets and secured with steel banding. 600 tons of canned meat, primarily pork and beef, packed in cases of 48 cans each. 400 tons of sugar in 50-pound bags, stored in the drier sections of the hold because moisture would ruin it. 200 tons of powdered milk in sealed tins. 150 tons of lard in 25-pound containers. 50 tons of medical supplies, including surgical equipment, morphine, and antiseptics. The cargo officer calculated that this single ship carried enough food to feed 250,000 people for 5 days at subsistence rations, if it arrived. Loading procedures followed protocols developed over 6 months of Arctic convoy operations. Heavy cargo went low in the holds to maintain stability. Lighter cargo went higher. Everything was secured with chains and rope to prevent shifting in heavy seas. Arctic storms could generate waves 50 feet tall. Loose cargo could break free, punch through bulkheads, compromise watertight integrity. Ships had capsized from cargo shifts. The stevedores worked methodically, checking every chain twice. They knew what happened to ships that sank in Arctic waters. Bodies were never recovered. Water temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. Survival time after immersion was 15 minutes maximum, usually less. The convoy, designated PQ-8, assembled in Reykjavik harbour over 3 days. 8 merchant ships total. The Thomas Hartley at 7,200 tons displacement was the largest. 7 others ranged from 5,000 to 6,500 tons. Together they carried 24,000 tons of supplies destined for Murmansk, then onward to Leningrad. The naval escort assigned to protect them consisted of 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, and 2 anti-aircraft cruisers. 12 warships to guard 8 cargo vessels. The ratio reflected the threat level. German U-boats operated in packs of 5 to 8 submarines. The Luftwaffe could launch strikes with 30 or 40 bombers. The Royal Navy calculated that anything less than a 3-to-2 warship-to-merchant ratio resulted in unacceptable losses. Convoy Commodore Richard Bevan, a retired Royal Navy captain recalled to service at age 61, commanded from the bridge of HMS Oribe, the lead destroyer. Bevan had sailed 2 previous Arctic convoys. PQ-4 in November lost no ships. PQ-6 in December lost 2 of 9 merchants. His orders for PQ-8 specified maximum speed of 10 knots to accommodate the slowest cargo ship. Formation would be 2 columns of 4 ships each, 600 yards between columns, 400 yards between ships in column. The escorts would form a protective screen, destroyers on the flanks, corvettes ahead and astern, cruisers positioned to provide anti-aircraft coverage. Radio silence would be maintained except in emergency. The route would take them north of Iceland, then northeast through the Barents Sea to Murmansk. Distance, 2,000 nautical miles. Estimated transit time, 10 days if weather cooperated. Weather in January, Arctic was never cooperative. Perpetual twilight at this latitude meant 4 hours of weak daylight, 20 hours of darkness or near darkness. Temperatures ranged from -15 to -30 degrees Celsius. Spray from the bow would freeze instantly on contact with metal surfaces. Ice accumulation on deck could add 50 tons to a ship's weight, raising the center of gravity and increasing capsizing risk. Crew members assigned to ice watch worked in 2-hour shifts, using axes and steam hoses to clear accumulated ice. The work was continuous. Ice formed faster than men could remove it. Carter walked the length of his ship, conducting final inspection. The Thomas Hartley was a Liberty ship, one of 200 built in 1941 under emergency wartime construction. Length 441 feet, beam 57 feet, draft 27 feet when fully loaded. Triple expansion steam engine generating 2,500 horsepower for a maximum speed of 11 knots. Crew of 44 men, average age 38, merchant sailors, not military. Half were British, half American. They signed on knowing the casualty statistics. 30% of Arctic convoy ships never returned. The men signed anyway because the pay was triple standard merchant rates and because they understood what cargo they carried. The ship's armament consisted of 1 4-inch deck gun aft, 4 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns, and 8.50 caliber machine guns. Minimal defensive capability. The deck gun could fire 15 rounds per minute to a range of 7 miles, useful against surfaced U-boats if the gun crew survived long enough to aim. The Oerlikons could engage aircraft, but required direct hits to cause damage. Merchant ships weren't built to fight. They were built to carry cargo and absorb punishment. Watertight compartments and damage control equipment were the primary defenses. If torpedoed, the goal was to stay afloat long enough for crew to abandon ship. Carter's cabin contained a single photograph, his wife and 2 daughters in Connecticut. He kept it in a waterproof pouch along with his master's certificate and personal papers. If the ship went down, the pouch would float. Recovery was unlikely, but preparation was habit. He had written letters to his family before departure, left them with the harbour master in Reykjavik, with instructions to mail if the Thomas Hartley failed to return. The letters contained standard reassurances. The convoy system was working. Losses were declining. He would be home by March. The reassurances were lies. Losses weren't declining. PQ-7 lost 3 of 11 ships in late December. Intelligence indicated German forces in Norway were being reinforced. On January 15, 1942, at 0600 hours, Convoy PQ-8 departed Reykjavik. 8 merchant ships formed 2 columns and steamed north into darkness. The temperature was -18 degrees Celsius. Wind from the northwest at 25 knots created wind chill of -35. Visibility was 4 miles in blowing snow. The escorts took positions around the convoy. Radio silence began. The nearest German U-boat, according to British intelligence, was 400 miles northeast. The nearest Luftwaffe base was 800 miles. The convoy had perhaps 48 hours before contact. Carter stood on the bridge and watched ice form on the forward rails. Somewhere 2,000 miles away, people were dying at a rate of 166 per hour. The cargo in his holds could save some of them, if it arrived. January 18th, 1942, 13:47 hours. Position 72 degrees north, 15 degrees east. The lookout spotted the aircraft first, a dark shape circling at 10,000 feet, too high for accurate identification, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, 4 engines, long-range reconnaissance bomber, German. The aircraft maintained distance, staying beyond anti-aircraft range, circling the convoy in a wide pattern that took 20 minutes to complete. Carter watched through binoculars from the bridge. The Condor wasn't attacking. It was reporting. Radioing the convoy's position, course, speed, and composition to U-boat headquarters in Norway. The hunt had begun. Convoy PQ-8 had covered 840 nautical miles in 72 hours. Average speed 11.6 knots, slightly faster than planned because weather had cooperated. Seas were moderate, swells 8 to 12 feet, wind from the west at 15 knots. Ice accumulation was manageable. The crews had cleared deck ice every 4 hours without difficulty. No ships had reported mechanical problems. The formation remained tight, columns properly spaced. For 3 days the voyage had been almost routine. The appearance of the Condor ended that. German U-boats could travel submerged at 8 knots, surfaced at 18 knots. If a submarine pack was 200 miles away when the Condor reported the convoy's position, they could intercept within 11 hours. Nightfall came at 1600 hours. The U-boats would attack in darkness. Commodore Bevan signaled the convoy at 1420 hours. Increase speed to maximum sustainable. Prepare for night action. The merchant ships acknowledged and increased to 12 knots. The destroyers moved into tighter defensive positions, 2 ahead of the convoy, 2 on the flanks, 2 astern. The corvettes formed an inner screen. Lookouts doubled. Every man not on watch was ordered to sleep while possible. Combat stations would be manned at 15:30 hours, 30 minutes before sunset. Carter ordered his gun crews to their positions early. The 4-inch gun aft, the Oerlikons, the machine guns, ammunition ready. Crews wore life jackets and cold weather gear. If forced into the water, the life jackets would keep them afloat for the 15 minutes until hypothermia killed them. At 18:42 hours, full darkness, the first torpedo struck. The SS Empire Starlight, position 3 in the port column, 600 yards to the Thomas Hartley's left. The explosion was visible before the sound reached Carter's bridge. A column of water and flame erupted amidships, 80 feet into the air. The sound arrived 2 seconds later, a deep concussive boom that rattled windows. The Empire Starlight listed immediately to port, 15 degrees within 30 seconds. Her cargo was primarily ammunition and vehicles. The torpedo had detonated in a hold containing 500 tons of artillery shells. Secondary explosions followed, smaller detonations that sent debris arcing into the night sky. The ship's back broke at the torpedo impact point. The bow and stern sections began separating. Survivors jumped into the water. The ocean temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. The men had minutes. HMS Blankney, the nearest corvette, turned toward the sinking ship to attempt rescue. Before it closed within 200 yards, a second torpedo struck the Empire Starlight's bow section. The remaining structure disintegrated. The bow disappeared beneath the surface in 40 seconds. The stern section remained afloat, vertical, the propeller and rudder pointing skyward. It sank 90 seconds later. From torpedo impact to complete sinking. 4 minutes, 20 seconds. The Blankney searched for survivors. It found 6 men alive in the water. 41 crew members died. The cargo, 4,000 tons including food, destined for Leningrad, descended into water 1,200 feet deep. Gone. The U-boat had fired from 800 yards, submerged. Standard ambush tactics. Fire 2 torpedoes at high-value target, go deep, evade counterattack. HMS Oribi and HMS Offa, the lead destroyers, raced toward the Empire Starlight's last position. Their Aztec sonar detected a contact at 400 yards, depth 200 feet, moving northeast at 6 knots. Both destroyers dropped depth charge patterns, 10 charges each, set to detonate at 150 and 250 feet. The charges exploded in sequence, creating underwater shockwaves powerful enough to crack a submarine's pressure hull. Water columns erupted on the surface, white geysers in the darkness. The Aztec contact disappeared. Either the U-boat was destroyed or it had gone deeper and was running silent. The destroyers couldn't confirm the kill. They returned to the convoy. Stopping to search would leave the remaining merchants vulnerable. Carter ordered his helmsman to maintain course and speed. Convoy doctrine was absolute. Merchants do not stop for survivors. Do not maneuver independently. Maintain formation. Breaking formation made ships easier targets. The cold mathematics of convoy warfare. Stopping to rescue 6 men endangered 3,200 tons of cargo needed by 250,000 people. Carter understood the mathematics. Understanding didn't make it easier. At 2218 hours, the Luftwaffe arrived. 18 Heinkel He-111 bombers, approaching from the northeast at 8,000 feet. The escort cruisers opened fire with anti-aircraft guns. Tracer rounds arced upward, red and white streaks against black sky. The Heinkels dropped flares first, magnesium parachute flares that illuminated the convoy with harsh white light. The merchant ships became visible from above, dark shapes on dark water made visible by artificial light. Then the bombers released their ordnance, 500-kilogram bombs falling in clusters. The bombs took 18 seconds to fall from 8,000 feet. 18 seconds of waiting, watching dark shapes grow larger against the flare light. The SS Harmatris, lead ship in the starboard column, took a direct hit. The bomb penetrated the deck and exploded in a cargo hold containing flour and sugar. The explosion sent a fireball 200 feet high. Burning flour dust created a secondary blast that blew out the ship's sides. The Harmatris didn't sink. It burned. Fire engulfed the superstructure. Crew members trapped below decks had 2 choices, burn or jump. Most jumped. The water killed them faster than fire would have, but drowning was cleaner than burning. The Harmatris burned for 6 hours before the flames reached a hold containing lard. The lard ignited and the ship exploded. 32 men died. 5,000 tons of food gone. The convoy sailed on. 7 merchant ships remained. 2 lost in 6 hours. The Germans had sunk 9,000 tons of cargo at a cost of perhaps 1 U-boat. Maybe. The attack would continue. The convoy was still 1,100 nautical miles from Murmansk. 4 more days minimum. Carter stood on the bridge and calculated. 2 ships lost meant 625,000 fewer meals delivered to Leningrad. How many would die because those ships burned? The mathematics were obscene. He didn't stop calculating. At 0200 hours, Carter called a meeting in the chart room. The first officer, chief engineer, and gunnery officer assembled. Carter spread charts on the table and made a proposal that violated every convoy protocol written. they would break formation. January 19th, 1942, 03:14 hours. Carter's plan was direct. The Thomas Hartley would increase to maximum speed, 14 knots with engines pushed beyond rated capacity, and run ahead of the convoy through the darkness. The risk was isolation from naval escorts. The advantage was speed and unpredictability. U-boats positioned themselves ahead of convoys based on calculated intercept courses. A single ship running faster than convoy speed would pass through the ambush zone before submarines could reposition. The tactic ignored established doctrine that safety came from staying together. Carter's counter-argument was mathematical. Convoy speed of 10 knots meant 4 more days to Murmansk, 4 days exposed to continuous attack. The convoy had already lost 2 ships in 6 hours. At that rate, nothing would reach Murmansk. Running ahead alone meant 36 hours to port instead of 96. Fewer hours exposed meant better survival odds, even without escort protection. The first officer argued against it. Breaking formation would draw court-martial charges if they survived. The chief engineer said the engines couldn't sustain 14 knots for 36 hours without risking catastrophic failure. The gunnery officer said a lone merchant ship couldn't defend itself against concentrated attack. Carter acknowledged every objection, then gave the order anyway. Those 3,200 tons of food were worth the risk. At 03:45 hours, the Thomas Hartley increased speed and pulled ahead of the convoy formation. By 04:30 hours, the Thomas Hartley was 2 miles ahead of the convoy, running alone through Arctic darkness. The engine room telegraph showed full ahead, then beyond full to emergency maximum. The chief engineer reported engine temperature rising, steam pressure at 105% of rated maximum, fuel consumption double the normal rate. Carter acknowledged and maintained speed. The ship's bow cut through swells at 14.3 knots, creating bow waves that sprayed ice-cold water across the forward deck. The spray froze instantly on contact, building ice layers 2 inches thick within an hour. The Ice Watch crew worked continuously, swinging axes to break accumulation before weight became dangerous. At 06:47 hours, a lookout spotted torpedo tracks. 2 parallel wakes, phosphorescent in the dark water, 300 yards to starboard and closing. Carter shouted helm orders. Hard to port. The helmsman spun the wheel. The Thomas Hartley turned, painfully slow for a ship weighing 14,200 tons fully loaded. The torpedoes passed 40 yards astern. Close enough that crew on the fantail could see the weapons clearly, dark shapes just beneath the surface trailing bubbles. The U-boat had fired based on the convoy's expected position and speed. The Thomas Hartley's higher speed had carried it past the intercept point seconds before the torpedoes arrived. The U-boat surfaced at 06:51 hours, 800 yards astern. Standard procedure after a miss was to surface, use deck gun to finish the target, then dive before escorts arrived. But there were no escorts. The Thomas Hartley was alone. Carter ordered the stern gun crew to open fire. The 4-inch gun boomed, firing high explosive shells at maximum rate. 15 rounds per minute. The first 3 shots missed, splashing into the ocean beyond the U-boat. The 4th shell struck the submarine's conning tower. The explosion tore metal, killed the deck gun crew attempting to man their weapon. The U-boat crash-dived. It disappeared beneath the surface, trailing oil. Carter didn't know if the submarine was sinking or evading. Either way, it was no longer attacking. At 09:20 hours, dawn twilight revealed ice fields ahead. Pack ice, extending north and south as far as visibility allowed. The ice wasn't solid. Leads of open water cut through in irregular patterns, some hundreds of yards wide, others barely ship width. Carter ordered a course through the ice. The convoy behind them would have to navigate around the ice field, adding hours to their journey. The Thomas Hartley pushed into the leads, using the ice as concealment. U-boats couldn't operate effectively in pack ice. Torpedoes couldn't be fired through ice flows. The risk was hull damage from ice collisions. The steel hull, 5/8 inch thick, could withstand glancing impacts, but direct collision with a large ice mass could tear plates open. The ship reduced speed to 8 knots and threaded through the ice field for 3 hours. At 12:47 hours, clear of the ice, the Thomas Hartley increased speed again. The engines had been running at maximum power for 9 hours. The chief engineer reported bearing temperatures critical, lubricating oil breaking down from heat, stress fractures detected in engine mount welds. Carter asked for time remaining before failure. The chief engineer estimated 6 hours maximum, possibly less. Murmansk was 420 nautical miles ahead. At 14 knots, that meant 30 hours. The engines wouldn't last. Carter ordered speed reduced to 12 knots. That bought time but stretched arrival to 35 hours. The gamble was balancing mechanical survival against tactical exposure. At 18:03 hours, 3 Junkers Ju-88 bombers appeared from the south. They approached at 6,000 feet in tight formation. The Thomas Hartley's anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The Oerlikons created curtains of tracer fire, red lines arcing upward. The Ju-88s dove. They released bombs at 2,000 feet and pulled up hard. 6 bombs fell. 4 missed, sending up geysers 50 yards from the ship. 1 hit the forward deck, penetrating the wooden planking but failing to detonate. A dud. The 6th bomb struck the starboard rail, exploded on contact, and killed 3 crew members standing watch. Shrapnel tore through the bridge windows. Carter felt something hot slash across his left arm. Blood soaked his jacket sleeve. The wound was superficial, a 4-inch gash. The ship's medic bandaged it, while Carter remained on the bridge. The Ju-88 circled for a second attack run. Before they could dive, weather closed in. A squall line approached from the northwest, dark clouds releasing heavy snow. Visibility dropped to 200 yards within minutes. The bombers broke off and disappeared into the storm. The snow continued for 8 hours. The Thomas Hartley ran blind through the squall, navigating by compass and dead reckoning. The storm provided cover, but navigation became guesswork. Carter estimated position based on speed and heading, marked it on the chart with a circle of uncertainty 15 miles in diameter. When the storm cleared at 0200 hours on January 20th, the stars allowed a position fix. They were 12 miles north of projected course, but still on track for Murmansk. At 0638 hours, another U-boat contact. This one attacked from ahead, the one direction the stern gun couldn't cover. The torpedo track was spotted 200 yards away, coming straight at the bow. No time to turn. Carter ordered full astern. The engines reversed, shuddering from the sudden direction change. The ship slowed, but couldn't stop. The torpedo passed directly beneath the keel, 12 feet below the hull. It didn't explode. Either a dud or the magnetic detonator failed to trigger. The U-boat didn't surface. It stayed deep and let the Thomas Hartley pass. By 1400 hours on January 20th, the ship was 180 miles from Murmansk. 15 hours at current speed. The engines were failing. The chief engineer reported 2 bearings seized, piston rings cracking, steam pressure dropping. Maximum speed now 9 knots. The convoy would catch up within hours. Carter maintained course. The final stretch was the most dangerous. Luftwaffe bases in Norway were within easy striking range of the approaches to Murmansk. German bombers could hit the ship every hour if weather permitted. At 21:45 hours, lights appeared ahead. Murmansk harbour, 40 miles distant. Soviet coastal artillery batteries controlled the approaches. Any German aircraft attempting attacks this close to port faced intense anti-aircraft fire. The Thomas Hartley was within the protection zone. Carter allowed himself one moment of relief. Then he returned to calculating. The ship had burned 380 tons of fuel running at maximum speed. That fuel could have been cargo space, opportunity cost, but the cargo was intact, 3,200 tons, enough for 250,000 people for 5 days, if it reached Leningrad. January 21st, 1942, 0620 hours. Murmansk Harbour. The Thomas Hartley tied up at Pier 7 with dock workers swarming the deck before the mooring lines were fully secured. Soviet stevedores moved with desperate efficiency, opening hatches and rigging cargo booms within minutes. The first pallet of flour sacks emerged from hold number 2 at 06:34 hours. By 0700 hours, 4 cargo booms were operating simultaneously, swinging loads from ship to dock in continuous rhythm. Each pallet held 2 tons. The stevedores worked in shifts that never stopped. The ship would be completely unloaded within 18 hours. Speed was survival. Every hour of delay was more dead in Leningrad. Carter watched the unloading from the bridge and counted what remained. The Thomas Hartley had departed Iceland with 3,200 tons. The dud bomb that penetrated the forward deck had destroyed approximately 40 tons of flour in hold number 1 before it could be contained and isolated. Fuel consumption at maximum speed had required burning 80 tons more than planned, reducing the amount of cargo space available by that same weight. Total delivered, 3,080 tons, 96.25% of original cargo. In convoy terms, that was exceptional. Most convoys lost 20 to 30% of total cargo to sinking, damage, or consumption. The Thomas Hartley's mad dash had preserved nearly everything. But the cost to the convoy was severe. Radio communication received at 0810 hours reported the remainder of PQ-8 had lost 2 more ships during the night of January 19th. The SS Waziristan and SS Catherine, both torpedoed within 3 hours of the Thomas Hartley's departure from formation. Combined cargo, 8,500 tons. Total convoy losses, 4 ships sunk of 8 that departed Iceland. 17,500 tons of cargo lost. The 4 surviving merchants were expected to arrive in Murmansk on January 23rd, 48 hours behind the Thomas Hartley. Their combined cargo, 16,500 tons. Total delivered from PQ-8, 19,580 tons of 41,000 originally loaded. Success rate, 47.8%. In human terms, the lost cargo would have fed 1.3 million people for 5 days. Gone. The cargo from the Thomas Hartley was transferred directly to freight trains waiting at the dock. Soviet railways had positioned 42 freight cars on the siding adjacent to Pier 7. Each car could carry 50 tons. The 3,080 tons required 62 cars, but only 42 were immediately available. The first train departed at 15:20 hours, carrying 2,100 tons. The second train would depart the following morning with the remainder. Destination: Volkhov Station, 560 miles south. From Volkhov, the cargo would transfer to trucks for the final 25 miles to Lake Ladoga's eastern shore. Lake Ladoga was the final barrier. The lake stretched 124 miles north to south, 80 miles east to west. Leningrad sat on the western shore. Soviet-controlled territory was on the eastern shore. The Germans held all land routes between. The only connection was across the lake itself. In summer, barges made the crossing. In winter, the ice became a road. The ice road, called the Road of Life, opened on November 20th, 1941, when ice thickness reached 7 inches, barely enough to support a loaded truck. By January 1942, ice thickness was 24 inches, sufficient for 3-ton trucks travelling in convoys spaced 150 feet apart to distribute weight. The journey across the ice was 18 miles along the marked route. Trucks travelled at night to avoid German artillery observation. Travel time was 2 hours in good conditions, longer during storms. German artillery at Signavino, 12 miles from the ice road, fired on the route randomly throughout each night. Shell impacts broke through the ice, creating holes that swallowed trucks. Drivers who survived the plunge into water at -2 degrees Celsius had perhaps 5 minutes before hypothermia rendered them unconscious. Most drowned still seated in their trucks. Despite losses, the ice road functioned. Approximately 350 trucks made the crossing each night, weather permitting. Each truck carried 2 tons of cargo. Nightly capacity, 700 tons reaching Leningrad. The city needed 2,000 tons daily to prevent starvation. The ice road delivered 1/3 of requirements. The rest had to come from stored reserves that diminished daily. The 3,080 tons from the Thomas Hartley represented 4 days of supplemental supply. 4 days where deaths from starvation might decrease from 4,000 daily to perhaps 3,000. 1,000 lives per day for 4 days. 4,000 people saved because one ship broke formation and ran. The bread ration in Leningrad increased on January 24, 1942. Factory workers went from 250 grams to 350 grams daily. Office workers from 125 grams to 200 grams. Children under 12 from 125 grams to 150 grams. The increase of 25 to 100 grams per person, depending on category, resulted directly from cargo delivered by the Thomas Hartley and 3 other ships that arrived January 23rd. Medical records from Leningrad hospitals documented immediate changes. Admissions for dystrophy, the medical term for advanced starvation, decreased by 18% in the week following the ration increase. Death rates declined from 4,000 daily to 3,400 daily by January 31st. The trend was temporary. By mid-February, deaths would climb again as reserves depleted. But for 2 weeks in late January, fewer people died because ships got through. Carter received no commendation for breaking formation. Commodore Bevan filed a report noting that the Thomas Hartley violated convoy discipline and endangered itself through reckless independence. The Admiralty reviewed the report and took no action. Carter was neither court-martialed nor decorated. The official record stated simply that the Thomas Hartley arrived Murmansk on January 21, 1942, cargo intact. The ship underwent repairs for engine damage and bomb damage for 3 weeks, then sailed with a return convoy to Iceland. Carter commanded the same ship on 3 more Arctic runs between March and July 1942. All 3 convoys maintained formation. Carter followed doctrine. The desperate innovation of PQ-8 was never repeated, but other captains noticed. The Thomas Hartley's survival proved that merchant ships could successfully operate independently in Arctic waters if circumstances warranted. The tactic wasn't officially adopted, but individual captains gained latitude to make judgment calls when convoy situations deteriorated. Later convoys, particularly PQ-17 in July 1942, scattered when faced with overwhelming German forces. Most ships attempting independent runs were sunk. The Thomas Hartley had succeeded through a combination of speed, weather, and extraordinary luck. The tactic worked once. It became legend among merchant sailors as the mad dash that saved a city. The cargo delivered by PQ-8, combined with supplies from subsequent convoys, allowed Leningrad to survive the winter of 1941 to 42. The city didn't thrive. Deaths from starvation continued through spring, but the catastrophic daily death toll of 4,000 decreased gradually as supplies arrived. By summer 1942, the ice road became a barge route again. Supplies increased. The siege continued for another 18 months, but the acute starvation crisis passed. Leningrad survived, barely, supported by ships like the Thomas Hartley that ran the gauntlet and delivered cargo measured in lives saved per ton. August 1945. Leningrad, scarred but surviving, began reconstruction. The siege had ended January 27, 1944, after 872 days of encirclement. The Soviet government released preliminary casualty figures that stunned even those who had lived through it. 632,000 civilians documented dead, though the actual number was certainly higher. Incomplete records, mass graves, bodies never recovered. Conservative estimates placed total deaths at 800,000. Some historians argued for over 1 million. The mathematics of death would be debated for decades, but the cause was undisputed. Starvation killed 97% of civilian casualties. Artillery and bombing killed the rest. The city had been transformed into history's largest prison camp, where the sentence was slow death by hunger. The Arctic convoys that sustained Leningrad through those 872 days were now being tallied in final statistics. 78 convoys total between August 1941 and May 1945. 40 convoys sailed to Soviet ports, 38 returned. The convoys delivered 4 million tons of supplies, including 5,000 tanks, 7,000 aircraft, 15 million tons of fuel, and critically, hundreds of thousands of tons of food. The human cost was calculated with equal precision. Of approximately 1,400 merchant ships that sailed Arctic routes, 104 were sunk. U-boats accounted for 58 sinkings, Luftwaffe bombers for 31, mines and other causes for 15. Roughly 3,000 merchant sailors died. The Royal Navy lost 18 warships and 1,944 naval personnel. The Germans lost 31 U-boats and approximately 1,000 submariners in Arctic operations. The loss rate told the story. Convoy PQ-8, which the Thomas Hartley had sailed in January 1942, lost 50% of its merchant ships. That rate was typical for early convoys. By 1943, improved tactics and stronger escorts reduced losses to 10%. By 1944, losses dropped to under 5%. The learning curve was written in sunken ships and drowned men. Later convoys benefited from experience purchased with earlier casualties. The Thomas Hartley's independent run represented an intermediate stage, when doctrine was still being written, and individual captains improvised survival tactics. Leningrad's survival could be calculated in tonnages delivered. The city needed 2,000 tons of food daily to prevent mass starvation. The ice road across Lake Ladoga delivered an average of 700 tons per night when operational, roughly 5 months per year when the lake was frozen. The remaining 7 months relied entirely on barges when the lake was ice-free. Combined delivery averaged 1,200 tons daily across the siege period. That created a sustained caloric deficit. Citizens starved slowly instead of quickly. Deaths occurred at a rate the city could manage instead of a rate that caused complete social collapse. The difference between delivering 1,200 tons daily versus zero was the difference between 800,000 dead and 2.5 million dead. Every ship that reached Murmansk shifted the mathematics towards survival. The specific impact of Thomas Hartley's 3,080 tons delivered in January 1942 could be calculated. The cargo allowed bread rations to increase by 25 to 100 grams per person, depending on category. Medical records showed dystrophy admissions decreased 18% in the week following. Death rates declined from 4,000 to 3,400 daily. The decrease lasted 2 weeks. That represented 8,400 lives saved directly attributable to one ship's cargo. The calculation assumed linear relationships between calories and mortality, which was imperfect, but the order of magnitude was correct. One ship running ahead of the convoy, delivering cargo intact, saved thousands of lives. Captain William Carter sailed 4 total Arctic convoys between January and September 1942. The Thomas Hartley survived all 4 runs, though it suffered damage on 3. In October 1942, Carter was reassigned to Atlantic convoy routes, considered less dangerous than Arctic runs. He commanded merchant ships on Atlantic routes through 1944. In March 1945, at age 52, Carter suffered a heart attack while at sea. He survived, but was declared medically unfit for further service. He retired to Connecticut and lived until 1968, dying at age 75. He never wrote a memoir. He gave one interview in 1961 to a maritime historian researching Arctic convoys. In that interview, he described the decision to break formation in January 1942 as calculated risk based on inadequate options. He expressed no regret about violating convoy doctrine and no pride about the outcome. Ships carried cargo. Cargo reached its destination, or it didn't. The mathematics were simple. The British Admiralty never officially sanctioned independent running by merchant ships. The tactic remained unofficial throughout the war. Convoy PQ-17 in July 1942 demonstrated the danger. When that convoy scattered under threat of German battleship attack, 24 of 35 merchant ships were sunk. Ships operating independently without escort protection became easy targets. The Thomas Hartley succeeded because it ran at night, through ice fields during poor weather and encountered only isolated U-boats rather than coordinated packs. The combination of factors was unrepeatable. Later captains who attempted similar tactics mostly died. Military historians assessing Arctic convoy operations recognized them as among the war's most dangerous assignments. Casualty rates for merchant sailors on Arctic runs exceeded casualty rates for RAF Bomber Command, previously considered the most dangerous Allied service. 1 in 10 merchant sailors on Arctic convoys died. 1 in 4 ships sailing to Soviet ports was sunk or severely damaged. The men who sailed those routes were civilian volunteers, not conscripted military. They could have refused Arctic assignments and served on safer routes. Most sailed anyway because the pay was triple standard rates and because someone had to deliver the cargo. The Thomas Hartley was scrapped in 1947. Liberty ships were designed for wartime emergency construction, not longevity. Most were scrapped or sold within 5 years of war's end. No memorial marks the ship's service. No museum displays artifacts. The only permanent record is in Admiralty files documenting convoy rosters and cargo manifests. 4 convoy runs, 18,000 tons of cargo delivered, 0 sinkings. Statistically above average, but not exceptional enough for special recognition. The cargo that reached Leningrad through efforts of ships like the Thomas Hartley meant survival for a city that became a symbol of Soviet resistance. The siege of Leningrad was utilized for propaganda during and after the war, but the propaganda obscured the mathematics. The city survived because approximately 1.5 million tons of supplies reached it over 872 days despite German efforts to prevent delivery. That tonnage represents 1,400 ships making dangerous voyages because the alternative was letting 2.5 million people starve. The moral calculation was simple, even when tactical execution was complex. Carter's mad dash in January 1942 saved 8,400 lives through direct caloric delivery, and perhaps thousands more through demonstrating that independent action could succeed when doctrine failed. The lesson wasn't officially adopted, but it changed how captains thought about orders versus outcomes. Sometimes breaking formation was the rational choice. Sometimes survival requires calculated madness. The ships that saved Leningrad carried more than food. They carried the proof that impossible journeys could be completed if the mathematics of necessity outweighed the mathematics of risk.